Hello, readers, and welcome back to Tell Between Tales. Today we are focusing on all things fall, as I have all got my fall colors on and my lovely pumpkins. And so we are going to go over our autumn book recommendations for you. I've got some adult, some young adult, and a little treat for you at the end. I've got some middle schoolers who are recommending middle school autumn reads. So stick around and I'll see you soon. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. My first book recommendation, I looked all over my house for this book and I cannot figure out what I did with it. I am super disappointed. I can't find it. But I'm going to pop up the picture right here for you. It is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This book might be well known to several of you, as they did recently come out with a TV series adaptation, of which I have seen the first season and I really enjoyed it. I've got the next two seasons on my watch list. I have to get around to it. Hopefully I can get to it this fall, because it'll be perfect. It's perfect for fall. Perfect for this time of the year. As the title indicates, A Discovery of Witches. This is a book that takes place in our world, except witches, vampires, and demons, specifically these three, exist. And demons, however, we got to touch on them for a second, because demons in this book are not like demonic demons. They are a magical creature, just like witches and vampires are magical creatures. And they tend to be very, very good, very specialized in some like specific area, usually in the arts. They're very, very good painters, very, very good performers. They excel in these areas. And some of them have been known to be seers, where they can see the future. They're often described as having like a dreamy look about them, and they don't really pay attention very well in class. And so they're very much along that artistic, they have like almost artistic super abilities. The series doesn't really focus on them so much. It focuses much, much more on the witches and the vampires. And so we know a little bit less about them, but that's kind of something that just needs to be mentioned right off. So we focus on Diana. Diana Bishop is our main character, and she is a witch, and she has distanced herself from all things witchy. She doesn't use her magical powers. She is not a member of the coven. She has pretty much left that path and left that life behind her, and she is a scholar and she is an academic, and she doesn't want anything to do with that part of her life for various reasons, which are revealed later on in the book. And so we first meet her. She is probably in her early 30s when we meet her, and she is at Oxford. She is studying chemistry, 17th century chemistry, at Oxford's Bodleian Library. While she is there, she is calling up all of her research books, and one of these books happens to be Ashmole 782, which becomes very, very important. This book ends up being like the keystone throughout all three books. And she sees this book and she immediately recognizes that it's magical. She doesn't want to touch it. She's like, oh no, a magical book. Why me? And so she's kind of trying to do her research and glean whatever information she can, while like not really touching it and kind of trying to distance herself from it. So she takes down a few notes and then she's like, okay, I'm done with this. And she just returns everything. Well, we find out like the next day that this is a really, really big deal. All three magical creatures have been after this book for reasons which are revealed later. And so they're all coming and surrounding her, and they're in the library now, and they're watching her. Is she going to call the book back up again? Why can she get the book? And everybody's been trying to get this book. It's been magically protected in this library. Nobody can find it, and nobody can get their hands on it. Like, why did she get it? And of course, they all know this because everybody's been keeping their eyes on this. And once it was called up, it sent out a magical pulse, which is why everybody knows about it. And so they're all coming in and surrounding her, and the coven witches are coming to talk to her, and then the vampires are coming to talk to her. And so over these next several days, these powerful members of the magical community are confronting her about this book and what happened. And one of them is one Matthew de Clermont. And Matthew de Clermont is a very powerful and very influential vampire who is quite old, and he is currently also studying at Oxford, which is why he just happens to be around. And his research is revealed later in the book. But it's very important to the plot lines and the threads that intertwine later on, what he's working on, and why he's so very interested in this book. So each one of these groups is wanting Diana to call this book back up for them, and each one of these groups is pretty much willing to get violent in order to get her to call the book back up. Now, Matthew is an interesting character because while he wants the book, he also is very much drawn into a protective role. He feels very protective over Diana, and he's just not quite sure why. And their early interactions with each other quickly blossom into a very sweet romance, and this angers the congregation. So the congregation is the ruling body of magical creatures. It consists of 9 people. There's going to be 3 from each group, 3 demons, 3 witches, 3 vampires, and there is a standing rule amongst them that there is no interaction, no cross interactions, no relationships between the different types of magical creatures. And because they want this book so badly, they use this to basically go after Matthew and Diana. So they are being hunted by the congregation. They're saying, you're breaking all the rules, especially because Matthew is very, very influential. His family name is huge. And Diana herself, you find out about her family, the bishops were quite an influential in the coven as well, and where they came from. The bishop name is pretty big in the story as well. So exactly what this book is and how it relates to our characters and what our characters go through to evade the congregation and to refine this book and to figure out what is going on, all of that unfolds throughout the trilogy. The trilogy is called the All Souls trilogy, and it was really, really well done. I really had a great time with it. This is a great book, especially the first one in the series is a great book to read in the fall because it has all of your witchy and vampire vibes, but it's not dark, it's not scary, it's not demonic, but it's definitely more along like the cutesy Halloween side of things, which I really like. That's my favorite side of Halloween is all the cute things. I'm not so much into all of the morbid, creepy, gross things. That's not, no thank you. I don't have any of those kind of decorations. But this one's really great because it's got all of that in there, and this is not really a spoiler. The book ends on Halloween. And it has this wonderful scene at the end where they're dressed up like witches and vampires are dressed up as witches and vampires in this little town, and they're handing out candy to all of the kids, and it just makes me happy. So yeah, I'm like giddy. It's just funny. It's cute. It's wonderful. It's great. And they show it in the TV show, which just makes me smile because it's so wholesome in that regard, where they're just being a part of their community and giving back and like, I'm a witch and I'm dressed up as a witch, and it's just so fun. All right, so my second recommendation for you for your fall reads this year is going to be Dragons of an Autumn Twilight. And Dragons of an Autumn Twilight by Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman. This is going to be your classic fantasy. It's almost like when is not a good time to have a good throwback to classic fantasy. But fall seems especially a good time to just lean back with just your favorite story about a group of people coming together. And you can see right on the cover, they're different races. We've got humans and elves and dwarves. And there is a race that they invented called the Kinder, or the Kender, which very reminiscent of hobbits, except that there's a few differences in personality, and they're a bit more quirky and a bit more adventurous than hobbits are, and so this group of humans and elves and dwarves and mages and wizards and all of that, they all get together to go off and fight the evil. It's your classic It's your classic story, very Tolkien-esque. I do believe that Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, the Dragonlance Chronicles, is basically Dungeons and Dragons. The game and the books are related. One of the differences, I mean, there's a lot of differences between this and Tolkien, even though it is definitely inspired by the classic Tolkien fantasy. But one of the things that I really love about this is that they go into much more detail about the wizards and how you study magic. And whereas in like Tolkien, the wizards kind of just are, and the magic is just kind of there. I mean, and in here, it's very much a soft magic system as well, but the whole order of mages is explained a little bit more. You get to see one of our main characters kind of studying magic and using magic, and the process that he goes through to become a wizard and become accepted as one of the, like a full, powerful, fully instated wizard. And you get to follow Razlan, that's his name. And his story is very interesting, and I always found him to be a very interesting character because he has hourglass eyeballs. Not eyeballs. That would be horrible. He has hourglass pupils. And so what that does to him and why he has hourglass pupils, you will just have to read the book to find out. And because that was something that definitely struck me as unique when I read the book, and it has stuck in my brain ever since. And it's a big deal in the book. It'll stick in your brain too, because they bring it up quite frequently. And so we have the whole first trilogy is a fantastic place to start in the Dragonlance Chronicles. And this is just a wonderful read, very fun, very fulfilling of those classic fantasy cravings that you might have around this time of year. My third recommendation for the fall, we're going to get more into a little bit of the Halloween and the spooky vibes now, is going to be Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot. This is the book that I read in high school because I'm a bit obsessed with vampires, and I was a lot obsessed with vampires when I was in high school. And so there are very few Stephen King novels that I have read, but when I was in high school, I was like, I need a good vampire book. So I was like, oh, well, Stephen King writes, King of Horror. It's like, and he's got a vampire book. I'm going to go read it. And that is the story of how I read Salem's Lot. So this is a great book to read around the fall, not only because it has your lovely vampire horror, but because it is more of a case study about a town than just filled with horror and creepiness. And so it's very interesting to really get this case study and really get involved in this town and these people's lives and the mystery of what is going on. And there's, weird things going on in this town, and they can't quite figure out what's going on. And I feel like it took a long time for this book to really bring out its vampiric nature and the vampiric tones and themes in it. That being said, the payoff is really, really good. The ending of this book and the climax of this book has stuck with me to this day. He does a really good job of bringing up, his favorite themes of good versus evil. And there's a little bit less of that in this one, I want to say. The whole book is not about good versus evil, but we definitely have a play on that, and he kind of twists that trope around, whereas, it talks about the good and having faith, and it's very much like faith in God versus like the vampire is going to be like the opposite of all of that. And so he kind of plays around with this trope a little bit in this book, and he explores themes of what happens when your faith fails. And that was very, very impactful to me when especially as a teenager, and just this whole idea of, this book isn't going the way it's supposed to be going. And so this was a very, very good book. Very, of course, Stephen King, master of horror. I was going to say very well written, but just about everything he writes is pretty much very well written. Although I haven't read everything, naturally. And so, although I do have a few things, I'm going to be reading The Stand this Halloween. So that's on my audiobook and on my to-read list. But getting back to the point, definitely a recommendation for reading around this time of year. Just for a little bit more information about what the book is about, it follows Ben Mears, who used to live in Jerusalem's Lot. So Jerusalem, shortened to Salem, that's where the title comes from, Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot. And he comes back to his town, his hometown, after 25 years, and he's trying to write a book. And his inspiration is this creepy event that happened in his childhood at this abandoned house. And so he comes back and he's like, oh, this abandoned house isn't abandoned anymore. And so there's a lot of mystery around the house and a lot of creepiness around the house. And he's got all that childhood trauma associated with the house. And henceforth, said story unfolds. My fourth recommendation for you today is going to be another vampire novel because I love vampires. And that is going to be Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. This is just classic vampire literature, and if you haven't read it, you should. This is probably, I don't know, it's probably one of my most favorite books of all time because there's just so much nostalgia associated with this series. This is actually a part of the Vampire Chronicles. However, the first 3 books make a really great trilogy. The first 3, I would argue that you can read the first 3 books and just be done because the books get weird after that, like The Tale of the Body Thief and Memnoch the Devil, and then they get really boring when you get to like the Vampire Armand, and then it kind of comes around after a while. And then it ends, she did finally finish the whole series, and it ends with Prince Lestat. So you could read the first 3, and then if you really wanted to, you could just jump to the Prince Lestat and see how everything ends. There'll be a few things you'll be a little confused on, but you'll be able to pick up most of the important threads. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, this is like the best book ever. And I will fight you on that because this is like just the most nostalgic book. This book launched my love of vampires. I read it when I was in 8th grade, and ever since then, I was just obsessed. And I think I was just really enamored with this 20th century lifestyle. It was very much romanticized. In here, you follow Louis, he's our main character, and he is in present day, and he's wanting to tell his story. And so he has an author, the person who is interviewing him, and he's recording Louis' story. And Louis very quickly goes over his mortal life. That's not what the book focuses on at all. And then it really slows down when he meets Lestat, who is, of course, his mentor and his creator, the one who turns him into a vampire. And it follows how Louis just has such a hard time switching and adapting into this life of darkness and killing, basically, because you have to drink blood to survive. If you don't, then it's not good. And so Louis is really struggling, and everything's from his point of view, but like Lestat's trying to figure out how to get him out of this funk, and their characters are so different. Like Lestat is very capricious and a bit bombastic and full of energy and I want to live the high life, and Louis is dark and depressed and moody and brooding, and how these two characters get along and how it plays out in 20th century New Orleans, and then of course Claudia comes along, which is the little vampire, the little girl, and why Lestat turns her into a vampire, and the part that she plays throughout the book, and the relationship that she has with Lestat and with Louis, and how that all changes over centuries because they don't age, and all of these things are brought up, and then her desires for growing up, and how she's changing, like her mind is changing. This is an interesting, I like this because it allows their minds to change, whereas in some other books, the child vampires are stuck with the childlike state of mind. But in this one, I feel like it's more realistic, because even if your brain doesn't develop anymore, you're still learning, you're still growing, you still are making memories, and you get new desires and have new experiences, and all of that changes you, and you see them evolve over the course of this book. And so it really focuses on this time period where Louis first becomes a vampire, and their time in New Orleans, and then eventually off they go to Europe for a bit, and then it kind of cuts off. So we kind of have like the middle. So we have the prequel, which is like Louis' mortal life, is kind of glossed over, and then we have the main chunk of the story. And then we have like the afterwards, which brings us up to present day, which is not really explored very much. And so it's like Louis is reflecting back almost on like his golden years. He's like, this time of my life was like when all the things were happening, like the most influential years of my life. And it's very fascinating. It's really good. I just loved it. And it definitely romanticizes vampires, but not in a Twilight way. I remember reading Twilight for the first time going, this is vampire fluff. Like, what is this? And so absolutely fantastic. Definitely recommend. All right. The fifth book I do not have because I borrowed it from the library as an audiobook, and I listened to it as an audiobook. So my fifth recommendation is a YA book. So those are all of my adult books. We're now going into the YA recommendations. It's going to be Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This was a great book. It wasn't too long. It was about 8 hours on audio. This is a standalone novel, which is perfect for those who are like just dipping their toes into the horror genre, because it is YA. It doesn't get too over the top, but it is definitely giving off a lot more of those spooky, creepy vibes, but not so overwhelming that like you can't sleep at night. So we follow Olivia, who lives in an orphanage, and immediately we know that she is unique because she can see what she calls ghouls, which are basically spirits of the dead, and they don't have all of their body parts. And so it's like sometimes she sees like an eyeball floating and like half a face, and it's super creepy. And there's a little bit of, dialogue about, when this first started and how she reacted to it, and now how she's coped with it. And she's the only one that can see these ghouls. Nobody else can see them. And she's realized that, they can't hurt me. They can't touch me. Like, they're insubstantial. She doesn't even feel anything when she passes through them or passes her hand through them. And so by the time we meet her, she's got a good grip on this thing that's happening to her, that she has no idea why she can see these. And so in this orphanage, Olivia has one clue or one possession of her mother. She has her mother's journal, which details basically her descent into madness. The earlier journal entries seem more like love letters and regular journal entries, and then as the journal goes on, the journal entries get more and more crazy, more and more delusional. You can't understand them. And it really seems like she's going absolutely insane. And Olivia doesn't know if this is genetic, if this is something she needs to worry about, or if this is just something that was her mom's problem, or why this happened, and if this was why her mom gave her up to the orphanage. She doesn't know if her mom is still alive and out there and crazy somewhere, or if she's dead. And this definitely weighs on Olivia quite a bit. But she does have this precious journal, and she reads it all the time, and we get to hear and we get to read all of those journal entries. Well, one day when Olivia is about 16, there is a letter that arrives at the orphanage that is from her uncle. And it says, "We've been looking for you. Your mother was not well when she left us. We are so excited for you to return home to Gallant." and which is the title of the book. And so Olivia is now very conflicted because in her mother's journal it says you will be safe. Like the very last thing it says is you will be safe as long as you stay away from Gallant. And so now her life is propelling her in that direction. She doesn't know what to believe. And the mysteries of all of that is really what all the rest of the book is about. So we're not going to say much more about that other than there's some very, very creepy vibes, very seasonal, and very well written. It was done fantastically. Great book for all YA and adult lovers. It was very well done. Love it a lot. The next book, which I also don't have because it was also rented from the library on Kindle, is called The House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin Craig. This book takes place in a fictional town by the seaside, and we follow Annalee, who is our main character, who is the daughter of, or she's in a wealthy family. Let's just say her father is very wealthy. And there used to be 12 people in her family. And then her mother died, and now 4 of her older sisters have all passed away. And her father's remarried, and the people of the town are starting to think that their family is cursed because so many members of their family has died. Now, naturally, none of the family want to believe this. They're saying, oh, they're accidents. Like, this person got sick. This person fell into the sea. Every single person who died, it was something different. And it's all very explainable, but there's still that kind of hint of, well, maybe there's a little bit of foul play going on in here. Maybe someone's out to get us. And then, of course, the town thinks that the family is cursed. Oh, something's going on there. Someone's cursed. So we follow this family and our main character, Annalee, as this most recent death has just happened. And they're trying to pull their lives back together. They're trying to find joy and meaning and purpose in their life and continue on after all of this tragedy and after all of this death. And they start to realize that actually there's really some weird things going on. Like, maybe this whole curse thing has some credit to it after all, because there's a lot of dark, creepy things moving in the shadows that we can't quite see and we can't quite figure out, that we don't really want to pay attention to because that means facing the truth, and I want to just move on with my life. So this story is strewn with magic and dancing and glamorous balls, but underneath all of that, an unknown terror lurks just under the surface, unseen, and it doesn't want to be seen because the longer it's ignored, the more time it has to work its nefarious agenda. And besides, who wants to admit that their own family is cursed? However, after a while, Annalee is forced to confront the truth, and then it becomes a race against whatever this darkness is to figure out what's going on before it has time to claim another person that she loves or to claim her own life. So I think this is a great read for the fall, especially for October. It has a lot of those dark undertones and mystery, but again, it's not too dark, it's not too horror leaning, and it also focuses on those kind of descent into madness type themes, and there's ghosts and magic, and it's really great for all those things. All right, and number 7, and my last recommendation that I have for you today before the middle schoolers take it away, is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This book won the Goodreads Choice Award for Best YA in Fantasy in 2018. And this is a dark fairy tale, and it's not really a fairy tale retelling because a lot of these fairy tales are unique and made up for the book. This is a very dark fairy tale. So 17-year-old Alice, and her story begins with a fair amount of backstory of where she has been moving with her mom from place to place to place to place, and it always seems like her mom is running from something. They never can settle down. They never can really establish themselves. She doesn't really meet any friends or make any friends. And we are also introduced to her grandmother, but in the sense of she is aware of her grandmother, and her grandmother is a person, and her grandmother is over there because she's this famous author that wrote this book of fairy tales. Now, this book of fairy tales is very interesting because it became insanely popular, like a sensation. But now it's really, really hard to get a hold of a copy of this book. Like these you can't find them anymore. So the copies are really, really rare. It's really hard to find them. And Alice finds herself kind of drawn to this book of fairy tales, but at the same time, she is very wary of it because her mother has always been like, oh, you need to stay away from all of that and stay away from your grandmother and stay away from where she lives in the Hazelwood. And so she's very conflicted in that regard, where she's very curious, but she's also very wary, and they're just moving around their whole life. But when we pick up the story, which they have stopped moving, and they finally settled down because they got a note that said that her grandmother had passed away. And so her mother's starting to feel a little bit safer now. However, shortly thereafter, her mother is kidnapped by a creature that claims to be from the Hinterland, which is the cruel place of all these dark fairy tales. It's where all these dark fairy tales take place. So now she has to decide whether to venture into the Hazelwood to save her mother, or to follow her mother's advice and stay away from the Hazelwood. So this book is a bit of a mystery, it's a bit of a wild ride, and it gets kind of weird in the second half. But it's great for the fall because it has all those dark fairy tale vibes. And it has a spooky wood and like this feeling of like being surreal. So that could be a really fun, really great fall read as well. Thank you for joining us today for our fall recommendations on Tell Between Tales. Let us know if you're going to pick up any of these recommendations in the comments below. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.